All right. So to restate the issue that we need to solve for, issue 685 is what I created to address this problem. We currently tag with our major, minor, timestamp GitLab SHA followed by the omnibus SHA. This made sense when we created it. However, we are now starting to add to the list of packagers that we are using to build stuff. So we now have our Helm charts, and we also have CNG that we will start tagging here in the near future. And having a tag that contains the omnibus SHA doesn't entirely make sense. So I think we need to figure out what to do with that tag, and how we could explicitly have necessary information so we know what precisely is being deployed at any given moment in time in a quick and easy fashion, as well as not hinder our ability to get to a solid mechanism in the future. That way we try to prevent delaying pushing Sidekick into production if possible. So let's get started. Jarv, you have a...
So yeah, just starting off, I guess, how do we feel about JSON files in a single directory in release tools? It sounds like maybe we're okay having the JSON files, but maybe we're not okay with putting it in release tools. And Alessio comments like organizing it by major minor. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yorick, I'm curious from your comment, like, would we combine maybe release tracking? No, release tracking, we're not writing any more JSON files, right? So there's no...
No, so the JSON tracking in the deployer is gone.
Yeah.
Now that I think of it, I don't know if I actually removed the existing JSON files, but whatever. I personally would prefer to avoid any such setup, largely because we get the same problems where we sort of mix two different purposes in the same repo. Basically have like a database and all the code, and you know, on the surface, nothing wrong with it, but it gets a little hairy. And there I found also that at least with the deployments tracking using the API, it's a little, especially if you have to append to files, which I guess if you do one file per version is less of an issue, but appending it, yeah, it gets kind of messy. What I was thinking of more, at least yesterday, was that we could maybe either upload a JSON file to the release, so the release feature, not the deployment. But then we found, oh, you can't actually attach files; it has to be like uploaded elsewhere. Now I want to double check, so I'm not sure if we can do that with tags. Let me just quickly check. But either way, the point would basically be you would get, you'd have the version that we deployed, you'd sort of correlate it to a Git tag, and then that Git tag contains the actual JSON or whatever it is. It's still kind of the same as tracking it in a repo, but it's not like as part of the physical collection of files. Although you of course still get the metadata when you fetch the tag.
But which project would be the canonical source for the tag metadata, or would all tags have this metadata?
So I would lean towards using the GitLab canonical repo for it. Yeah. Largely because that's, I guess, what most people would expect the data to be. That does get a little tricky with security releases, because in a security release, we wouldn't record that information there. We'll probably go in the security repo, but then you have this weird split where it's like, oh, if it's a security release, we have to go there, and release tools may not actually be aware of that difference. So when it records a deployment, it just gets like a version number, an environment, and a status. That's it. It doesn't actually know from that, hey, are we dealing with a security release, or is this something else?
I don't think we can do so, because we have to bump the version on Omnibus that will generate a new SHA, and that SHA will contain the SHA of the Rails version. So we need this to be stored somewhere else that we can collect all the final SHA after we tag, update everything in one
Right.
place, because we have to, yeah.
Yeah, so what we could do is, since we have the security split, we could just, let's say, for example, we create a new repo whose only purpose is this. And if it's a dedicated repo, then you can do JSON files. And basically, you could even use issues, I guess, because it's not used for anything else. I think for me, it always comes down to what we really want to be able to do is get a Git tag, create a GitLab release for it, and then just upload some arbitrary artifacts to it. And yeah, I kind of feel like that should be the way to do it, basically. Because then when you get the version, you get the tag, you figure, okay, what's corresponding release? Oh, and we need the artifact, version.json, let's download that, off we go.
I was thinking about having plain file database, which every folder is a tagged release, and then kind of how we do this in Kubernetes, we have several JSON files that maybe we start with a simple one, which is components.json, and has a well-known structure, which is name of the version file, because I don't want to write another mappers that changes from the version mapper file to the name of the key in somewhere else. So we can stick with that one because it's the same in every project. And the value is the SHA or whatever we want to write down. But if we want to expand this, we can just write a new file in that folder and we can add other kind of metadata. But more importantly to me, if we want to move away from this and go to some kind of key store value, we already have the structure in place, because you just work the folders and then you can convert this to YAML or whatever it is, and you have the key value for everything. And if we just keep it simple in the repo, we already have plenty of API calls in our tooling that we just download something, and in that something we can get the component versions.
I think one of the problems I see is that we're talking about tags, but it's not even clear like whether each release, like we're not tagging GitLab EE right now. We only tag Omnibus GitLab. I'm not sure if we will start tagging GitLab EE. And then we have this issue where we might have a charts release that has a charts change, but no other change, like no change. So then in that case, like would we tag everything? I almost am beginning to think we kind of go with this kind of flat file structure. And these don't necessarily need to be tags. I mean, basically it's just a release that corresponds to component versions, which may be tags, it may be SHAs, but actually tagging, I guess like, yeah, we'll probably still need to tag Omnibus GitLab because it triggers the pipelines for the tag pipeline. But I don't know, are we just tagging Omnibus GitLab in charts and that's it? Are we, this part's confusing to me. I don't know what we're gonna do.
Jarf, before we go to answer that question, which is I think a completely separate problem now, important, but a separate problem. Can you check out the link I gave in the doc for the feature called release evidence? It actually might be interesting to go down that route, which would allow us to create a separate project, create issues based on deployment, which will contain all of the information, who deployed when, and so on, and then see whether this release evidence can be used as a feature. It's like the output seems like a, like a proper JSON object there, and hopefully it would allow us to do things over the API as well. I don't know exactly what it does.
Based on that output, it looks like it's collecting milestones, and then those milestones have issues. It doesn't look like we can directly associate issues. So that seems like we'd have to first create the milestone and then associate a bunch of issues with that milestone that has metadata in it. And that just seems like we're kind of, I don't know, putting a square peg in a round hole.
Right, but that also means that we don't store JSON files anywhere and we use a feature. I don't know exactly what this feature does though. What is it supposed to do? But I can ask the release release feature team.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what the use case was that they intended or what they created this for.
I think it's kind of similar to where on GitHub, Let me very quickly give an example. I think NeoVim uses this, where they essentially use their GitHub's releases feature as sort of a change log. Let me quickly pull that up. So let me add that to the doc. How do you feel? Blah, blah, blah. I'll just add their example of NeoVim. Oh, there's something wrong here with multiple people editing. There we go. So that link, the way I understand it in GitHub, you have, similarly tags and releases, and I think releases are always associated with tags. It's been a while since I used this. And then you can just upload arbitrary stuff to release. I used it in the past as well, some projects when I was still using GitHub.
This one seems to be related to milestone. So you should, it looks like you have to release a tag with the same name of a milestone, and then it will do the magic and find the
No, I think you could create them manually. Let me just quickly check, because I have a project that I think still uses or has them publicly available.
No, but I'm talking about our own feature, the release.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so in GitHub, you choose an existing tag or you create a new one, and then you can give it an arbitrary title and upload stuff to it. And so that's, I guess, kind of what the release team was going for, except you can't give it a title, you can't upload stuff, and you couldn't create it using the UI for some reason. Which...
No, you can create it with UI. It's just that you have to create a tag, and then there's an extra box. If you write it, that will be the content of the release. But it's a secret thing.
Hold on. So if I edit a tag, it says release. Anyway.
So say this is an option, right? Like we need to investigate, obviously, but say we need to create milestones. We need to create tags. Does it matter if we create a new project that will be only there to store this information? Does it matter whether we're going to overload the project with milestones?
Well, this feature here doesn't seem to allow you to write anything here. It's just collecting evidence, which means that it has a way for finding related information, and duplicating everything will not be helpful for us because we don't have issues in there. But moreover, we just want to store the tag. So
I'm kind of suggesting this as an option to increase the visibility. So that's one of the asks that I've placed. So we are already creating issues for feature flag rollout. So we have that log thing that Yori created, and we are abusing project to store issues, to store some data there. Nothing is preventing us from extracting the Git, the information from the Git tag that we currently store in the auto deploy tag with all the Git Alicia and blah, 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 all of that we have. And for every deployment we create, we can raise an issue, note all of these things out, know the details of who, what, when, and then if necessary, create a milestone. I don't know whether milestone and tags are important here, but I'm going to use an example of extreme case, right? If we need to create a milestone in order for us to be able to create a tag, in order for us to be able to create this release evidence, that is all within the GitLab API, and it's all very simple to do. I think, at least. And that would kind of give us a free pass of not combining release tools with these JSON files. We know the problems with this. And it would also allow us to do this on ops, for example, and then just mirror the project on .com, and so on. So it's kind of simple solution, let's say solution, for this part of this problem.
I think like I think like for getting our dog fooding cookie, it's like it's a lot of pain, like because I think we would have to pack information and issues.
In
Like, and that's
title, because it's the only information you
yeah,
can get.
exactly.
So on in issue
Sorry,
titles.
I don't understand. How are we packing too much information? We would have to create JSON files that we
Yeah,
want to
but-
store in a Git
but-
repository. So,
But it's overloading issues for something that they were designed for. It's really overloading things. It's just like, it just feels weird. Like you would have one release per milestone, let's say, and then in each issue you would have an issue per component. And in the title you would have like the versions, or the author name could be the component name. You know, you could think of like ways
Yeah,
you can
and you
totally
have-
overload
yeah.
issues.
And
But,
you have to parse this inside every place where we are already parsing the version files.
And issues aren't replicated between ops and GitLab.com, so that doesn't really help us that much here. And I really like, it just doesn't feel like this was designed for the problem we're trying to solve.
Right. I think at least from a release tools perspective, using issues, the biggest issue there is that we're going to have to basically parse Markdown using regular expressions. And we control the format, so in theory it's easy, but all it takes is one person to go in like, oh, I don't like this format or something like that, and the whole thing sort of collapses. And even if not, it's just kind of difficult to do this in such a way that okay, it's strict enough, it will never accidentally find the value below it instead of the one above, etc. No, you can take that step further, basically create issues, and the body is just JSON. That's it. You parse that, but then you kind of get a point like, okay, why are we using issues in the first place? And if you're going to do that, then I would say, okay, let's just put them as a file in a repo, because then at least it is mirrored, and we know that it's a JSON file. So when people see it, they're like, oh, I probably shouldn't mess with this manually. So put it this way, given all the sort of options we have and their limitations, having a separate repo where it's, I guess, one JSON file per version with all, or at least a directory with one or more files in it, but sort of a one-on-one link between your version and the data. That will be fairly doable. It's just not the most pleasant approach to work with, I guess. And their implementing might be a bit tricky, because I'm not sure if we have to modify just Omnibus or release tools or both, because Omnibus is probably, it's the one that builds the package, so it knows probably what Helm chart it's, what Helm version, which Omnibus version, whatever. But Omnibus doesn't really have the code in place, as far as I know, to interact with the API and etc. So it would have to, I guess, trigger a pipeline in release tools, and then release tools has to do the actual work. So we get this sort of weird circle again. And
okay, so
with sort of
that, maybe completely misunderstanding this this first problem we are trying to solve then, because I was under the impression, like in the discussion point, it says we want to use release tools to record the version every time. So if we are recording the version, we don't need to parse anything afterwards, right? Like we only want to have this as evidence.
No.
So we need to parse it if we want to later use this. For example, for recording deployments, for example. The way that works now is the deployer starts a pipeline and gives it the version, environment, status, etc. And then release tools takes that version and says, oh, the GitLab EE SHA is this, and the Omnibus SHA is that, and then it does a little extra work to figure out how to do it for Gitly, and then everything sort of builds on top of that.
I think all the logic work would go into release tools. So release tools would gather all the versions, write it out, and then anything else that needed to consume those versions would just, fetch the file, and that's it. I don't think we would have multiple projects writing. We just have release tools would be the single writer. So I think that in that sense, it's fairly simple. I think there is a question of like, would we write to ops or write to GitLab.com? Because now, what is the source of the commits on GitLab.com or ops? And we have to make that decision. But other than that, I think it's fairly straightforward. Right?
Yeah. So my point more there was, if we start going down this path where we start creating issues and milestones, there's quite a bunch of steps involved. Like we say, oh, we have to add this milestone, maybe these labels, etc. If it's just a JSON file, it's just use the API, upload a file, that's it. So my point was more like we should keep it as simple as we can get it, especially keeping in mind that probably at some point we want to use the GitLab releases feature to track this data once we can actually. In terms of where, I think since we are moving release tools to ops, it should probably just be on ops because this version data is not particularly useful to developers. Like they don't care which SHA was deployed.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it kind of sucks that the mirroring would be the other way. You know, it'd be from ops to GitLab.com, but I think that probably would work.
Yeah, and in the meantime, to add that, I tried to figure out if there's any issue for uploading artifacts to the releases feature. I have been unable to find any. So you know, maybe there probably are, just using different terms. But if you look for anything like upload artifacts, release artifacts with the DevOps release label, etc., I can't find anything, which either means it's there using different terms or it's not really planned. But you know, neither is very promising for us at this particular point.
Yori, could you check out the comment after the release evidence that I linked? I asked Alessio, add release notes to Git tags. And I mean, that box is showing, I mean, that you can attach stuff to it. Like, it's not only comments that you can attach.
Right. So those are just the how do you call it, the Markdown uploads. So you upload and then just adds a link in the Markdown. It's not like this physically separate thing where you can sort of query it using an API. Using this approach, we could do that. We could attach, but then you still have to sort of parse that upload URL out of the Markdown. Whereas what I was hoping for is that you just have, say, an API where you say, oh, given this these release notes, give me the artifacts, and then you just get a list, boom, done.
And any developers can change it later on. I'm not sure if it's developers or maintainer, but yeah, it can be changed later on.
Okay, so the reason why I'm kind of pushing hard back on having the JSON files. So FYI, like if you recall, for auto deploy, like we all agreed that those JSON files we used was good enough for that time. What I'm trying to do now is find a bit of a more stable solution. We knew all of the problems that storing JSON files in the repository bring. And one of the solutions here is not to get that dogfooding star that Jarv mentioned. It's more about leveraging some of the features. And if we don't have them, building them for ourselves, because I don't want custom tooling. I want to leverage what we have as much as possible because it adds overhead maintenance wise, right? Do you recall when JSON, us storing the JSON files in Git repository was causing like deployment failures because the job would not be able to find or parse or whatever, right? And that's what I'm trying to kind of avoid as much as possible. That's part. Okay, cool.
We need something to add a custom JSON to the release evidence feature if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe I guess first step there would be to ask, I forgot her name, the PM of release mention, not Orit, but the other ones.
Yeah, so I have a call with her tomorrow.
Right. So I think the first step there.
Jackie.
Yeah, that's her. So I think the first step there might be to ask, hey, you know, do you have any issues for uploading artifacts to release notes? Because you know, we couldn't find them. And there are two, like, hey, you know, please prioritize that. If not, if the issue's there, I guess we can do it. Kind of similar to what we did with deployments. Like the UI side, we can just leave for now. If we just have an API to upload stuff and get it, that's good enough for now. Because any UI we add, it's going to take like 2-3 months for people to figure out how to visualize that. So we basically do the same as with deployments. We go in, we build an API, keep it simple, and then it's like, you know, here's a pile of follow-up issues, have fun.
I think that might be the approach. So let's finish this topic with, I'll go to speak with Jackie to see with the product what we can achieve there, and fallback here is go down the route of storing JSON files in the Git repository if the timelines end up being like too long. I'm fully aware this is blocking us from the migration on Kubernetes, so I don't want this to take too much time. Is that okay for everyone? I don't see any movement, so I'd like some cue whether this is agreeable or not.
Yeah, sounds fine.
I hope it's okay. I just have concerns with how to interact with this stuff so we could send the right stuff between release tools and our deployment mechanisms in the future. I think those are problems yet to be solved.
I think that we should split the problem now. No, I mean, we don't need to change Omnibus and everything right in the same moment when we change the way we track. So we can just write those files in the repo, and we can do this with the API so that we don't touch Git. So it's just our own APIs. And then after we tag it, we update all the subcomponents, and in another time in the future, we will just update Omnibus and everything to fetch information from the central repository. But this will solve us all the problem that we have in release tools, because release tools, when you get notified back, it has to figure out from a tag coming from nowhere what were the components involved in there. And if it's already written down, we say, okay, this was the chart version. We don't have to add the weird .chart SHA to the tagging mechanism that we have in place now.
Just a question, are we also deciding on whether we're going to change the tag format, or is that a different discussion?
I think that will come. So the first step will probably to record this information using the existing tag format. And then I think changing the tag format is going to be fairly invasive, since that we would have to change Omnibus, we'd maybe have to change the deployer, have to change quite a bit of release tools, because now the input is going to be a much simpler tag. And if I say, oh, wait, we have to actually get that info from here now. And so that, it's going to be a couple of steps. We can probably do that incrementally. Like we can add the recording first from these tags, then I guess change it to support both old and new format, and then drop the old format, etc. But it's going to take a little while, I think, probably in the order of a couple of weeks.
And just one last question while everyone is here. What will this new project be named, and what group will it be under?
Component.
Component.
It's on ops. Let's see what the root group is.
Because release tools is under GitLab org. I think it'll eventually change, but
right.
You could put it.
I think I would do GitLab-org, because GitLab-com is usually for like GitLab.com specific stuff. And although we use it for GitLab.com, the sort of data itself is just package information. So I guess GitLab-org/releases or something like that, or components. Or maybe just versions.
Let's not use components or versions. It's too arbitrary. Not that the other things are not. Sorry?
Release DB.
Meta, maybe? Like release meta, or?
Yeah, something like that is fine. I'm more inclined to push this under the group wherever release tools ends up. So if we end up deciding that GitLab on ops, release tools are going to be in a certain group, we should put it next to it. Right now, I'm more inclined to just say that we'll keep the state as it is and keep it in the same group.
I'm so tired of this stuff that it's like, it's hard to make a decision. I don't know. I feel like whatever we choose, we're going to probably change it later.
Of course, that's technology, Jar, right? I thought that's kind of normal. But when you say this, what specific this do you mean? Because there are a lot of
the group, the what subgroup to put it under.
Oh my God.
This is what will change, right? Like, and this is something that shouldn't change, but it will.
I think the group is probably the least of the problems, because that's in the code sense, that's essentially just one line you change where it's going. So if this group use the other one, so it's
So should we just do Git? Yeah.
On ops, we don't have to follow what we have on GitLab.com. Really, we don't.
I really want to though.
I know why you want that,
please.
but I'm also saying that we have a lot of inherited things from like history on GitLab.com, and we don't have to repeat those mistakes. Like the separation between GitLab.org and GitLab.com really doesn't make sense right now for this company. So I'm saying that we don't have to make a decision right now, but we can make a decision if we want to on ops.
So we could just we could put it under its own. We don't even use GitLab.com or GitLab.org, right?
We can just have it completely separate. Release tools can be under that as well. All of our tooling, if you want to, we can put it under that specific group.
Yeah. I don't know.
Cool. So Jar, I know that we are at time, but we are making very slow decisions because these are hard problems. Your second point was there related to which projects are we tagging?
Yeah. I think, I guess first is we probably shouldn't change anything right now. So we'll continue to tag Omnibus and we'll tag charts, and that's it. And I guess the difficulty here, Skarbek, is going to be like how we handle charts only changes and how we handle Omnibus only changes. Do we start off with just having two tag formats? One is the simplified version, which you use for charts, and the current version, which is for Omnibus, or do we do something different? Like I think we should take an incremental approach here. So maybe we come up with a simplified tag for charts, and we use the existing tag for everything else.
I think that is not a bad idea. I worry about what confusion that may introduce, as we'll have tags with different information in them. I mean, we already have a difference in our tag structure because our Helm charts have a different tag compared to what we do today, you know, with 3.1. whatever versus 12.9. whatever. We can't carry that same tag into the Helm chart as it stands today.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think like we're going to be slowly moving to a state where we're not extracting versions from the tag anymore. So really we should just have a way to identify a tag as an auto deploy tag. Right? And
I would agree,
to do that,
with some sort of uniqueness to it, yeah.
And I think yeah, exactly. So which was probably timestamp. And perhaps we just add the string auto deploy to the tag and include a timestamp. It's very generic. All our regexes are just, you know, look for auto deploy and that's it. That does simplify things, but to change it for our current tag is going to be a little bit of work. It's not too bad. At least we don't have backports, so we only move forward. So I think we just have to update a couple projects or a few projects.
Yeah, I think just including like dash auto deploy or dash auto or something like that should be more than sufficient.
Should we discuss at all the storing, maybe not the JSON, but something in the annotated tag message, not the tag itself, but like the message, and then we just parse that?
I thought about this. I mean, we jokingly talked about storing JSON in there. The problem here is like, what is the canonical project that holds the tag? Because right now we don't really have one outside of Omnibus. So it's like, would release tools then be tagged with the data, or would all of the projects that get tagged with the data, you know, like, or would we do charts in Omnibus where, you know, I think it's
well,
tricky.
Like charts in Omnibus are kind of inherently separate, right? You can't say the tag in Omnibus gets created in the tag in the chart because that's nonsensical.
So I think in that sense, like, whether we want to put JSON in the tag description or use the releases feature, we're gonna probably need to create tags somewhere because this releases feature relies on tags as far as I can tell. And so if we have this components, metadata, whatever repo, the idea I had in mind is you basically just want to commit just as a README, and then we just retag that every time. And the tag is, whatever the version is that we deployed. And then we associate all the data to that, whether that's in the description as artifacts or something else. It basically means you'll end up with, let's say, 10,000 tags all on the same commit. But as far as I know, Git doesn't care about that. So should be quote unquote fine.
Why would they be on the same commit?
So we don't have to create new commits, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's because otherwise you end up having to create like a dummy commit, that changes something. But as far as I know, at least our API and Git itself, you can just create 1 million tags on the same commit.
Yeah, it doesn't care.
Fine.
So basically that would allow us to, like, regardless of whether we, like this project, let's call it release DB, whether we store JSON files in it or not could become our single source of truth when it comes to all things tags. And this could allow us to also think about how are we going to tag things in other projects like Omnibus, charts, GitLab, components. I don't know whether it's necessary to go that deep. But theoretically, if we have just a specific syntax in this new project, we can derive all of the things in different projects, right?
Yeah. One of the things we keep mentioning is like a repository of, files that are the component versions at each stage, but we only need a single file, and then you update it and tag it. And then if you want to see the history of it, you just go to that tag or the commit history for that file, right? You don't need one file for each release or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. We could do it that way. Like instead of, yeah, you could just tag a file and then something external, another project could just fetch the version, of that file. Yeah.
Right. You can view a blob at any.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There is going to be the issue, like technically it's possible to have deployments running in parallel. Like you can have a staging deploy that's running while there is a canary deployment. And so kind of depending on where in that pipeline we create this data, you may end up with 2 jobs updating the same data. So let's say you have a file that's simply called, let's say version.json, and it just contains the version details of the latest deploy. If 2 deployments come in, they can override each other. And this is a problem we actually had with the deployer JSON, where under certain conditions, the order of deployments would end up being different, because it would basically take the whole file, post it, and then the other one would override it. So we had the
we ended up separating it by environment, I think.
Yeah, so we had one directory per environment. And so if we use sort of a current version approach, we have to do that split again per environment. But technically, there's nothing stopping us from running multiple deployments in the same environment. Like you can have
I don't understand why, because we only tag once. It's not per environment.
No, so what we had, at least in the deployer, was you would have, for example, deployer, you kick off to Canary, your own startup, and then somebody say, hey, let's also deploy to staging. If that staging deploy happens to be, basically if they both happen to reach the tracking stage at the same point, just whoever comes last wins.
Wins, I understand that, but what we're talking about here are the mapping of like the marketing release to the component versions, which that only happens once. It only happens when we run the tagging job in release tools. It doesn't happen per environment.
So this component info, we would also update it for other deploys, for example, because we need the data.
I don't think so. Like where it's deployed to is another thing. Like this is just, I thought the only thing we're talking about is this is the tag and these are the component versions for that tag. And then what environment that's deployed. Yeah. What that environment, what environment has that deployed? That's tracked in somewhere else.
Right. But so
this prompted the discussion from having one file which will contain all of this information, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So even if we create this new tag, if it starts updating that file, because there might be like 2 things happening at the same time, 2 tags being created at the same time, they could clash by for updating that specific one file. I think that's where we are coming from, right?
Yeah, so for a security release, we would actually end up tagging multiple things. But in all cases, you can scope that per environment version, whatever. I think my point was more that if we use this approach, let's say for a moment, forget about a conflict, we basically create a git tag somewhere for the version. We associate all the metadata with that. If we only use that for stable releases, so .0, .1, etc., we end up with this weird split in release tools where we still, for auto deploys, have to handle these weird auto deploy versions and then say, oh, it's an auto deploy. So then we have to do all these steps. And then at the tag release, like, oh, wait, a tag release. Now we suddenly have to go to this release database repo, get our data there. What I was sort of steering towards was we basically throw away these auto deploy versions. We say, no, that release database, that's where we always go for figuring out, is this an auto deploy? What's the SHA? What's the Gitly version, etc. And in that setup, you can have multiple deployments updating these or creating these tags sort of in parallel. And that's where sort of
I see
current version doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I think the simplest approach, well, least problematic approach is we get whatever version we're deploying, tagging, whatever. For that, we create a tag, and this will be 12A1-auto or the auto deploy week number or something like that. And you put all the metadata in there. So long term, you end up with a repo of 10,000 tags, whatever. But it means at any given point you can say, oh, for this version, this was all the data. And we can then, release tools creates that, but it also feeds it back into itself so that it can use it to record deployments, create QA issues, etc.
I'm not sure if I'm kind of like, I'm not sure it would be better having a tag with meta information in the tag or having files or having one file or have multiple files. I think I can see
I think
pros and cons to all.
So I don't think there's a point in tagging if we store it in files, because then we wouldn't use the tags. We just go to the file.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the approach there is, let's say we go to the release management group and they say, oh, yeah, we can do that in, let's say one release. Then we would have an API to upload artifacts. At that point, we just create tags and we tag some dummy commit, whatever the last one is, which is just readme or something, and all the info's there. If that doesn't work, if it's too long, too complicated, whatever, I think we just go for files where per version we have a directory or one file, depending a bit on how future-proof we want it to be. And then in there we store the omnibus, whatever SHAs, etc. I think a directory per version with a JSON file in it might be a little more future-proof in case you want to have this case where in the future you want to say, oh, we have this completely different piece of information that we also want to store there. But practical speaking doesn't really matter. Like the code would more or less be the same anyway.
Sorry, Yorick, I got really completely distracted with some information that was coming my way. Did you just explain basically that we can just use this one project regardless of which way we decide to go?
Yeah, so we create this release DB project. And ideally we use release features so we can sort of dog food our own stuff.
But we don't have to, like, we can start with this right now and like decide and move, unlock ourselves and then switch to the features, right? Like that's what you're saying. Sorry, I got distracted.
No, so if the release group says, no, this is going to take 3 months, we can say, you know what?
Yeah.
We'll just create a folder, call it releases or something. We get a bunch of JSON files, off we go. And we'll have the same problems as the deployer with JSON files, but we kind of know those problems, and I think it has the least problems of all the ideas we can come up with.
Cool. No, so that sounds fine to me. Does this answer the question though? Which project are we tagging? It's going to be that project then.
Yeah, it will be like a dedicated project.
Okay, Jarv, is that sufficient?
Sort of, except we also have to tag Omnibus still. So we probably would also tag Omnibus with the same tag. because we rely on tag pipelines for Omnibus.
Yep.
And maybe we
so
would tag charts as well. So we would tag charts, Omnibus, and this new project. And then the meta information would be either in the tag or we would have one file or whatever we do. Like,
so
doesn't matter.
I think that like in Omnibus, GitLab, all these source projects, we can create tags, and technically we should for patch releases and whatever. But they won't contain all the SHAs and whatever because it's not particularly useful there. It's more sort of user-facing information. The separate repo would have like a pile of metadata that we only use for release tools and whatever stuff.
Cool. Awesome. We are way over time, but do we want to continue through the rest?
I guess I'm kind of curious what the next steps will be. It sounds like we're probably going to do this for auto deploy first, focusing on auto deploy first before we focus on official releases, right?
Yeah.
And who's going to be driving this primarily? Skarbek or someone else?
I mean, I can take the release tool side of things. Like I've been knee deep in the deployment stuff there anyway. I think at release tools, it would be, at least for this initial setup, it wouldn't actually be that much work because we have all the data. We have it sort of torn apart at various places because we need it separately. So it's more or less a matter of figuring out sort of where we hook in and then say, oh, at this point, create a JSON file with this done.
That sounds good to me. Let's start with that. I think let's start with that and let's see how far along we get, and we can reconvene to handle things once we have more information. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. It feels like there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen here. Maybe we should do another fast boot.
Yes, I'm on board with this.
I mean, we have the summit coming up.
Yeah, but honestly, like it is going to be highly coordinated because, yeah, just to get everything, all the pieces working together, it's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, I think the benefit here is we can do this incrementally. Like we don't need to illustrate as a first implementation, we can, for example, just record the EE and Omnibus and Gitly SHAs. And maybe whether it's tag and all that. Basically, the info we already have, we just spit it out in JSON, and that's fairly a fairly small amount of work, all things considered. And of course, feeding that into other systems is going to be more difficult, but I think we can all do that sort of in parallel, incrementally. We don't have this case where we say, okay, at this point, everything needs to be done.
Cool. Sounds good to me. I think it's a good step. I have one item for myself, but it's not blocking. Yorick, you'll create the issues from this discussion. Skarbek, you'll upload this somewhere or share this because I think we shared quite a lot of information here that we didn't really capture. So it would be useful to have it handy to reference. Cool. All right. Well, I guess thanks everyone, and let's move on this.